Welcome to MurderFiles 101. Tonight we step into one of the most chilling cases of modern America, the Idaho murders. 4 young lives ended in a quiet college town. What unfolded behind the walls of an ordinary house would haunt a nation and leave investigators chasing shadows. Moscow, Idaho. Once a name lost to maps, now synonymous with terror, on a November night in 22. The promise of youth was cut short, but before we walk into that house, let me ask you, where are you watching from, and what time is it there, as this story unfolds? The victims were young, vibrant, and full of life. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Names that would soon be etched in grief. Friends, roommates, lovers. Their world revolved around classes, parties, and quiet nights, not knowing fate was already carving out a final chapter. Kaylee was a senior, ready to graduate, full of plans and ambition. Madison, her closest friend, mirrored her energy, a sister in all but blood. Xana, thoughtful yet lively, held her circle together with warmth. Ethan, visiting that night, was steady and kind, tied by love and loyalty. The house where they lived sat on King Road, perched against the edge of campus life. A 3-story rental, ordinary to passing eyes, but a gathering place for students. Its walls had seen laughter, late-night study sessions, and whispered secrets, until the night those walls became silent witnesses. The night began like countless others. Friends drifted between parties, restaurants, and the quiet rhythm of student life. Moscow was calm, the air cold, the kind of November stillness that settles on small towns. No alarms sounded. No one imagined death was already moving closer, step by step. Kaylee and Madison spent the night out, visiting a local bar, later captured on surveillance, walking arm in arm through the cold. Xana and Ethan chose a different path, attending a nearby party, 4 lives running parallel, moving toward the same dark intersection of fate. By 2 a.m., they returned home. The lights flickered on across different rooms. The house settled into its nightly rhythm. Text messages sent, phone calls made, food ordered to neighbors. The King Road residence seemed quiet, even ordinary, but in hindsight, those hours now echo like a countdown. Above them, 2 other roommates slept. Survivors, though they didn't yet know it, their lives would soon be divided into before and after. They would later speak of muffled sounds, of confusion, of silence so heavy it felt unnatural. That house would change them forever. The street outside was still, snow-dusted lawns and rooftops, and only the occasional headlights cut through the dark. Students walked home from parties, unaware of what lingered nearby. No one thought danger was watching, that something cold and deliberate had already entered the night. Phone records would later reveal ordinary behavior, texts exchanged between friends, social media scrolling, moments so mundane they now ache with finality. Screens glowed, laughter lingered, and routines carried on until silence swept in, absolute and permanent. The attacker's path remains a shadow in those hours. Did he watch the house from a distance? Did he pace in darkness, rehearsing each step? The investigation would later reconstruct fragments, but no one inside that house could have sensed the weight pressing in on them. By 4 a.m., the house had gone quiet. Rooms closed, blankets pulled, lights dimmed, sleep had come, or something near it. They did not know they were in their final hours, that breaths were counted, that dawn would not arrive for them. Outside the night lingered, calm and unbroken. Inside, a door would open, and the course of countless lives would be rewritten. From this point on, time loses its innocence. This was no accident, no tragedy of chance. It was planned, carried out with intention and brutality. When the sun rose, 4 lives were gone. Families would wake to futures they could not imagine. Investigators would step into a scene that would scar them, and the nation would learn the name of Moscow in whispers. This is the story of silence turned to screams. On the morning of November 13th, 2022, Moscow, Idaho awoke to a silence far more sinister than the one that blanketed the night. The King Road house did not stir. Hours passed. Friends texted. Calls went unanswered. Plans dissolved into confusion. By late morning, concern had turned to unease. At 11:58 a.m., a call was placed to 911. What police would find inside that house would unravel the ordinary fabric of a college town and ignite a nationwide storm. When officers entered the residence, the first floor showed no signs of chaos. It was quiet, undisturbed. But as they climbed higher, the scene transformed. 4 students were found brutally stabbed. It was a massacre contained within walls that only hours earlier held laughter. The brutality was staggering. Rooms that had been filled with warmth were now forever altered. Blood-soaked bedding, walls and floors, the silence broken only by the hum of police radios. Investigators would later describe it as one of the most violent crime scenes they had ever witnessed. The 2 surviving roommates had remained in the house, their lives spared for reasons unknown. They had heard sounds in the night, footsteps, faint voices, but they never opened their doors. When dawn came, they assumed their friends were still sleeping. It was only later, as the day lengthened and worry grew unbearable, that the call for help was made. By then, it was far too late. The police response ignited more questions than answers. How could 4 students be killed in their own home without neighbors hearing? Why had 2 roommates survived untouched? And why did the crime scene appear both chaotic and controlled, as though violence had unfolded with method, hidden beneath madness? Officers secured the perimeter, marking off the lawn with tape, posting guards at every angle. Word spread quickly across campus. Students whispered of horror on King Road. Parents began calling, frantic, urging their children to lock doors, to leave town if possible. Panic took hold. Inside, detectives tried to piece together what had occurred. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or shattered windows. The victims' personal belongings remained in place. Phones, wallets, computers. Nothing appeared stolen. This was no burglary gone wrong. Whoever entered that house came for one reason: to kill. Blood evidence suggested the attacks happened swiftly, with precision. The killer moved from room to room, leaving devastation but no obvious trace of himself. It was a crime that bore both rage and calculation. Investigators immediately feared they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than a transient or opportunist. As news began leaking into the public, speculation ignited. Was this a targeted attack, or a random act of madness? The quiet of Moscow shattered, replaced by a town suddenly aware of its fragility. The bodies were removed under the cover of nightfall, but the image of that house was already burned into memory. Families were contacted, their worlds collapsing with words they could not believe. In towns far away, parents pulled children closer, haunted by the randomness of it all. The coroner's reports confirmed the cruelty. Each victim had been stabbed multiple times. Some bore defensive wounds, signs of desperate struggle. Others appeared taken by surprise, attacked in sleep. The precision of the wounds suggested a large knife, sharp and wielded with grim intent. A single weapon, but enough to end 4 lives, in minutes. Detectives quickly realized they faced a case of extraordinary difficulty. No weapon was found, no footprints or fingerprints led a trail away from the scene. DNA, if present, was hidden, waiting to be uncovered through painstaking analysis. Every inch of the house became evidence. Every speck of dust, a potential clue. The surviving roommates were interviewed, their accounts critical, yet incomplete. They had heard what they described as crying, voices, a door closing, but fear, confusion, and shock clouded their memories. They could not explain why they had not called earlier, why they stayed silent through the night. This gap in time became a wound in the investigation. Every missing minute left space for the killer to vanish into Moscow's shadows. The town's trust in safety dissolved overnight. Moscow was small, tight-knit, defined by the rhythms of student life. Suddenly, fear was everywhere. Locks were checked twice, curtains drawn, shadows scrutinized. The police presence increased, but their reassurances faltered in the absence of answers. Rumors ran wild. Some believed it was a stalker. Others whispered of rivalries or secret grudges. Social media swarmed with speculation, each theory more sinister than the last. Journalists descended on the town, amplifying the sense of spectacle. Satellite trucks lined streets once quiet. Cameras pointed at the King Road house, like vultures circling. Police held press conferences, carefully chosen words masking the chaos behind the scenes. They admitted little, only that no suspect had been identified, no murder weapon recovered, no clear motive established. When asked if the public should be afraid, they hesitated. Fear deepened with every pause. Parents pulled children out of classes. Students fled home, unwilling to sleep in houses that now felt vulnerable. The entire community had been placed in a cage of suspicion, wondering if the killer lived among them, walking the same sidewalks, breathing the same air. The investigation expanded rapidly. State police and the FBI joined Moscow detectives, bringing manpower and technology. Dozens of agents canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, collecting video footage, searching for witnesses who might have seen something, anything, that night. Tips poured in, some helpful, many wild. People claimed to see strangers lurking, vehicles circling, figures watching from tree lines. Each report had to be verified, sifted, weighed against mounting pressure. Days stretched into weeks. The victims' lives were examined under a microscope, where they went, who they spoke to, every friendship and relationship dissected. The brutality of the crime made clear this was not random. The killer had chosen his victims, his location, his moment. But why, and why leave survivors? National attention only increased the weight on investigators. Politicians called for answers, families demanded justice, and the media speculated endlessly. But within the chaos, one thing remained constant: the silence of the King Road house. It stood behind police tape, its windows dark, its secrets sealed. The crime scene had been cleared, but the questions had only grown, and somewhere out there, a killer walked free. In the weeks following the murders, the town of Moscow fell into a fog of suspicion. With no arrests and little information from police, theories flourished. Friends, neighbors, even strangers, became subjects of whispered blame. Social media amplified every fragment of speculation, turning ordinary lives into targets of scrutiny. Some focused on the surviving roommates. Why hadn't they called 911 until late morning? How could they hear crying, footsteps or a door closing, yet not act? Investigators explained that shock often paralyzes, that fear distorts judgment. Still, the questions lingered. The survivors were thrust into the glare of a nation desperate for answers. Others turned suspicion outward, to ex-boyfriends, classmates, strangers seen in blurry videos. Each rumor carried weight, spreading faster than facts. For detectives, it was a dangerous distraction. Hundreds of leads had to be checked, cross-referenced, and ruled out. Every delay gave the killer more time. The FBI profilers who joined the case spoke quietly of behavioral patterns. The killer, they suggested, might be someone who planned meticulously, someone familiar with knives, someone capable of moving through a house in darkness without hesitation. They warned he might already be watching coverage, feeding on the fear he had created. The brutality of the crime pointed to rage, yet nothing had been stolen, and no signs of sexual assault were found. This narrowed possibilities, but did not provide clarity. Rage without theft, without assault, without fire. What was left was something colder, personal, intentional. Detectives sifted through hours of surveillance from surrounding streets. Grainy images revealed cars moving in the night, shapes crossing intersections. One white sedan began to stand out, a Hyundai Elantra, seen circling the neighborhood in the early morning hours. But in November, with snow on the ground, countless vehicles looked alike. The search widened to hundreds of similar models. Meanwhile, families of the victims faced their own torment. Grief mixed with frustration, as days passed with no suspect named. Press conferences felt hollow, assurances rang thin. Each family carried the unbearable truth that their children were gone, while the killer remained invisible. As the town reeled, the university attempted to resume normalcy, but every classroom held empty chairs, every dormitory whispered of King Road. Safety was a word that no longer belonged in Moscow. Behind closed doors, detectives worked tirelessly. In public they stood silent, watching a community unravel. One early theory focused on the possibility of a stalker. Kaylee, according to friends, had felt uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death. She told her circle she suspected someone might be following her, whether paranoia or prescience. It haunted investigators. Could the killer have fixated on one victim, with others caught in the path? Cell phone data became critical. Detectives subpoenaed records, mapping pings and signals. They traced movements of dozens of people connected to the victims, narrowing the scope. Patterns emerged, familiar routines, normal movements, nothing immediately alarming. But buried in the data, anomalies began to appear. Witness statements also held weight. A food truck video from the night of the murders showed Kaylee and Madison standing together, waiting for a late-night meal. Nearby, a man lingered. His identity was quickly discovered, and he was questioned. Ultimately, police cleared him, but not before the internet had labeled him guilty in the court of rumor. This cycle repeated endlessly. Each potential lead inflamed speculation, only to collapse under evidence. Still, the whispers continued. For investigators, the danger was clear. The real suspect could slip further into shadow while the town fixated on ghosts. The white Elantra grew in importance. Detectives issued a public call, asking for help locating the vehicle. Tips flooded in from across the country. Owners of similar cars faced questions, sometimes hostility, yet the request was deliberate. Police knew the killer's vehicle might be hiding in plain sight. At the same time, forensic teams worked relentlessly. DNA evidence was recovered from the crime scene, minute traces that could belong to the killer, but matching it required time, databases, and luck. Weeks passed, each day another reminder of absence. The public grew restless, the families more desperate. Investigators refused to reveal details, fearing compromise of the case. But this silence only fueled mistrust. Some accused the police of incompetence, others of concealment. In truth, detectives were assembling a fragile puzzle, each piece too delicate to expose. Inside briefing rooms, the atmosphere was tense. Profiles were drawn, timelines mapped, suspects considered and dismissed. The case was not cold, but it was cautious. To move too fast risked losing the one chance they had to catch a killer who had already proven capable of vanishing into night. By December, the weight of the murders had spread far beyond Moscow. National media camped on the town's borders. Commentators dissected every rumor, and online forums swelled with amateur detectives. The investigation had become both a pursuit of truth and a spectacle. Still, within the noise, progress was being made. That white Elantra, seen circling near King Road, was finally traced. Registration records pointed investigators toward a graduate student in criminology, living across the state line in Pullman, Washington. His name was Brian Koberger. At first glance, he appeared ordinary, a student, a teaching assistant, someone immersed in academic study of crime. But as detectives pulled at threads, unease grew. His movements aligned with critical moments in the timeline. His vehicle matched the one sought, and DNA comparisons began to whisper confirmation. For the families, December brought cold air and colder realities. Their children's faces were printed across screens, while the suspect remained only a name under scrutiny. But behind the scenes, investigators felt the noose tightening. The shadow they sought was finally beginning to take shape. December 30th, 2022. A quiet neighborhood in Pennsylvania woke to the sound of sirens. At 1:30 a.m., police surrounded a family home. Inside, a man suspected of killing 4 students in Moscow, Idaho, was asleep. His name, Brian Koberger. The arrest shocked the nation. Koberger was 28, a doctoral student studying criminology at Washington State University, just 15 miles from Moscow. To outsiders, He seemed an unlikely suspect, but to investigators, the threads had finally converged. His white Hyundai Elantra had been captured circling near the King Road house on the night of the murders. His cell phone data showed patterns of proximity, and most damning of all, DNA left at the crime scene was matched to him through genetic genealogy. The arrest was the result of weeks of coordination between local police, state authorities, the FBI, and forensic specialists. They had tracked his movements across the country, monitoring his return to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Every mile of the trip was shadowed by law enforcement. By the time the raid was executed, investigators were certain. They believed the man sleeping inside that house had ended 4 lives in silence. The evidence against Kohberger was chilling in its detail. Surveillance cameras captured his vehicle, making multiple passes near the King Road residence in the early hours of November 13th. At 4:04 a.m., the car vanished from view, only to reappear minutes later, speeding away from the neighborhood. Cell phone records revealed his device had been turned off during the critical window of the murders, but in the weeks leading up to that night, his phone had pinged near the victim's residence at least 12 times. Prosecutors later argued this was evidence of premeditation, suggesting he had stalked the house, studying routines, planning his crime. The most damning piece, however, came from DNA. On a knife sheath left at the crime scene, investigators recovered a sample. Genetic genealogy linked it to Kohberger's family. A covert operation then followed him in Pennsylvania, collecting trash from his parents' home. Tests confirmed the DNA was his. Forensic precision had pulled a shadow into focus, yet questions lingered. What was his motive? Why had he targeted these students? And how had a man studying criminology, someone who claimed to understand criminals, become the very predator he dissected on paper? The arrest was not just the end of a manhunt. It was the start of a deeper horror. As investigators pieced together Kohberger's life, a disturbing portrait emerged. He was described as socially awkward, obsessive, prone to unsettling comments. Some peers recalled his fixation on the psychology of killers, his intensity in class discussions. At Washington State University, he served as a teaching assistant. Students complained of his harsh grading, his cold demeanor. He studied under professors who specialized in criminal behavior, immersing himself in theory. Yet beneath academic pursuit seemed an undercurrent of darkness, an admiration not for justice, but for control. In one chilling discovery, investigators uncovered an online survey he had created while studying criminology. The survey asked ex-convicts about their emotions, thoughts, and motivations when committing crimes. The questions revealed an obsession with understanding what drove people to kill. In hindsight, it felt less like research and more like preparation. But still, a question haunted everyone. Why these 4? No direct connection between Kohberger and the victims was ever found. No personal ties, no interactions beyond the possibility of surveillance. To this day, the motive remains obscured, as if silence itself was his reason. Court documents revealed more unsettling details. A surviving roommate had reported seeing a masked figure in the house that night. She described a man dressed in black, athletic build, bushy eyebrows. The figure walked past her, exiting through the sliding glass door. She froze, terrified, never realizing she had looked directly at the killer. This account aligned with the timeline established by surveillance and phone data. It also underscored the precision of the attack. Kohberger moved through the house with chilling confidence, sparing the lives of some, extinguishing others. It suggested, not hesitation, but intent, a deliberate selection of victims. The discovery of the knife sheath, left behind, was perhaps the only mistake. Investigators believe Kohberger carried out the attack with careful planning. But in the chaos of violence, the sheath slipped from his control. That single object became the fulcrum of the entire case. As news of the arrest spread, relief clashed with horror. Parents and students felt safer, knowing someone had been caught. But the revelation was terrifying. The killer had been hiding in plain sight, attending classes, grading papers, living a life indistinguishable from anyone else. The case moved swiftly into courtrooms. Koberger was extradited to Idaho, facing charges of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. Cameras captured his first appearances. Expressionless, cold, eyes darting but unreadable. For the families, it was the first time they saw the man accused of ending their worlds. Prosecutors announced they would pursue the death penalty. Defense attorneys countered, framing him as a man presumed innocent until proven guilty. The legal machinery began grinding forward, each hearing another chapter in a story that had already scarred the nation. But even with an arrest, the shadows lingered. Motive remained unclear. Questions about his planning, his choices, his silence persisted. Could someone who studied criminology have believed he could outwit investigators? Or was this less about intellect and more about compulsion, an urge he could not resist? For Moscow, Idaho, the fear did not dissipate overnight. The King Road house remained sealed, police tape fluttering in the wind. Students still avoided walking alone, families still locked doors twice. The community had a suspect, but closure was far away. The silence that began in November had not lifted, it had only deepened. The arrest of Brian Koberger gave Moscow a name, but not peace. The King Road house still stood like a scar, its windows boarded, its walls echoing with what could never be undone. For weeks, it became a pilgrimage site. Students left flowers, notes, and candles, filling the lawn with light against the darkness. Parents stood at the edge of the crime tape, staring at the house that had stolen their children. Nothing about its quiet exterior could explain the horror it contained. The families of the victims each carried a burden that could never be balanced. Kaylee's family spoke of her bright future, her plans to move to Texas, her boundless laughter. Madison's parents remembered her fierce loyalty, the kind of friendship that never wavered. Zana's loved ones recalled her resilience, her spark. Ethan's family grieved a son who had been a twin, a brother, a presence impossible to replace. For them, justice was a word, not a reality. Trials would come, sentences might be given, but none of it could return what had been lost. The families stood together, united not by choice, but by tragedy. Their children's names were now forever entwined, written in silence and in grief. The trial of Brian Koberger looms as one of the most closely watched in recent history. Prosecutors built their case on the weight of DNA, cell data, and surveillance. Defense attorneys worked to pick apart every thread, questioning procedures, suggesting alternative explanations. In the courtroom, the fight is not just over evidence, but over the very idea of truth. Each hearing draws reporters, legal analysts, and families. Cameras capture Koberger in silence, his expression unreadable, his presence chilling. For some, he is the embodiment of evil. For others, he is a figure still cloaked in unanswered questions. The judge has ruled the case a death penalty trial, raising the stakes to their highest point. If convicted, Koberger could face execution. Yet the road to that outcome is long, paved with motions, appeals and legal maneuvers designed to stretch time. For the families, every delay feels like another wound. And in the background, a nation watches, torn between fascination and horror. The Idaho murders are no longer just a case. They are a mirror of fear, a reminder that even in the safest seeming places, darkness can seep in undetected. As the legal process grinds forward, Moscow itself struggles to define what it has become. The University of Idaho dedicated scholarships in the victims' names, ensuring their legacies would live beyond tragedy. Candlelight vigils continue, anniversaries marked by silence and prayer. Yet beneath the gestures lies a wound that resists healing. The King Road house has been slated for demolition, a decision meant to remove the physical reminder of horror. Some welcomed the news, believing it would allow healing. Others resisted, arguing that erasing the house also erases memory. Still, the structure stands for now, a monument to questions without answers. Students walk past the site with uneasy glances, knowing their campus is forever changed. Moscow, once known for quiet streets and autumn leaves, now lives with a shadow that will never entirely lift. Every parent who drops off a child at the university carries an unspoken fear that safety is an illusion and innocence can vanish in a single night. The families continue to speak, refusing to let their children's names fade into silence. They attend hearings, hold press conferences, and push back against delays. Their voices carry weight, reminding the public that this story is not only about a killer, but about lives stolen. In interviews, Kaylee's parents speak of her dreams, the wedding she never had, the children she would never raise. Madison's family describes her as a light extinguished too soon. Sana's loved ones hold on to her smile, her energy, her will to live. Ethan's siblings, especially his twin, speak of a bond severed, but never forgotten. Their grief has become part of the record. Each memory shared is a counterweight to the silence that followed the murders. In telling their stories, the families ensure the victims remain more than names on a case file. They are remembered as people, vibrant, alive, stolen, in an act of cruelty that no courtroom can fully explain. The Idaho murders remain unresolved in one critical sense. Motive, no letter, no confession, no explanation has emerged. The why lingers like smoke, elusive and suffocating. Perhaps it will never be known. Perhaps the silence is itself the answer. What endures is the reminder of fragility. 4 lives were taken in a place where futures should have been safe. A college town became a crime scene. Families were broken. A nation stared into the gap between safety and fear. Tonight, as you listen, the King Road house stands, or perhaps already falls, but its presence endures in memory. The trial will eventually end. Verdicts will be delivered, and sentences handed down. Yet for those who lost daughters, friends, siblings, nothing will close the wound. This was not just a story of a killer, it was a story of 4 lives stolen in silence. Some crimes echo louder than the rest. This one still whispers through Moscow's streets, through every parent who kisses their child goodbye. Justice may come, but absence never leaves. This was MurderFiles 101. Another case waits. Stay ready.